What would the people of Edom do if Israel passed through their land? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible.
Is worth the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers chapter 20. We're going to be reading from verses 14 to 21. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers chapter 20, beginning of verse 14. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice, and sent the angel, and brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from your wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. Then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory. So Israel turned away from him. The 40 years of wandering in the wilderness has come to an end. The children of Israel are in Kadesh, and like their parents, they complained against God for water, wishing that they had died in the wilderness. And God heard Israel's cry and commanded Moses to take his rod along with Aaron and go to the rock in Kadesh, speak to it, and water would be provided. Instead, while scolding the people, Moses struck the rock. Now water did come out, but because Moses didn't hallow God before the people, Moses would not lead Israel to the promised land. We had noted in our last lesson that a natural spring might have existed behind the rock, and because Moses struck it, he could have released it. Thus, he would be taking credit for the water. In his words, it also appeared like Moses was taking credit. However, had Moses done what he was told, getting water this way would have had to have been a miracle by God. This new generation had been preserved by God in the wilderness, but they either didn't see or wouldn't remember all of the signs that God performed for Israel from the Exodus to then. Thus, Israel would have needed to see a miracle like this and know it was from God in order for their faith to be strengthened. In the end, Moses let his anger get the best of him, and it cost him from entering Canaan. This problem has been foreshadowed throughout the trip from Egypt. Israel has time and time again sinned against God, and Moses has had to deal with it and was righteously angry at Israel for their sin. But anger should never be allowed to control us, nor keep us from doing right. In this moment, Moses' anger clouded his judgment, and he raised himself up to be the provider of water. Perhaps if he wouldn't have become angry so much, but allowed God to deal with the people's sins, then this event wouldn't have happened. Regardless, though, it did, and Moses paid the consequences. While in Kadesh, Israel was just outside the territory of Edom. On our maps, which has Kadesh on the east side of the Jordan River, the direct route to Canaan would have been to pass through Edom and either attack Canaan from the south, which would be the route that the spies took, or to attack Canaan from the east, crossing at Jericho, which they eventually did. No matter which way they were to take, they would have had to pass through Edom, which were the descendants of Esau. When it comes to the placement of Kadesh, this story here in Numbers 20 really cemented my belief that Kadesh couldn't be where most maps put it, which is in the southern Levant, bordering Canaan. The reason? Because why would Israel have to pass through Edom at all? God could have simply led them up through the south. There was absolutely no reason to cross over to the east side of the Jordan River only to attack Jericho, nor was there any indication given by God before Numbers 20 that was the route he was going to take them in. That is, unless Kadesh isn't in the southern Levant, but near the eastern border of Edom. If Kadesh is here, it makes total sense as to why Israel would have to pass through Edom, for now it is clear that God's intention is for them to attack Canaan from the east. But just because God was going to lead Israel to Canaan didn't mean that they could simply go wherever they chose. Israel was a large nation, and if you invaded another people's land, that people would come to fight you. God was not going to give the land of Edom to Israel, for Esau was a son of Isaac too. They therefore asked permission to pass through. The messengers that Moses sent appealed to the king of Edom as a brother. They said that the king knew all about the history of the children of Israel, how they were afflicted in Egypt, how God brought them out of Egypt and led them to Kadesh. How the king of Edom would have known these things, we're not told, but when we get to Joshua, Rahab is going to say that the peoples around Canaan had heard of what God was doing for Israel. And that does make sense, for Israel was not a small nation. It had no land of its own, and so the peoples of the area would sit up and take notice, lest they have to face this people in battle. Moreover, the peoples of this area traded with Egypt and could have gained information that way. Whatever the case, the messengers knew that the king of Edom understood their situation. The messengers assured the king of Edom that they would not pass through their fields or vineyards, nor drink from their wells. All they wanted to do was go along the king's highway, which traveled north-south through Edom on the east side of the Jordan River. The king of Edom refused and threatened Israel with war if they tried to do so. Israel tried again and said that they would travel by the highway, and if any water was drunk by the people or the livestock, they would pay for it. This offer of money didn't change the king's mind, so Israel would be forced to travel a different way. What that way was will be discussed in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 20, verses 22 to 29, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.